Wake that ass up
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We got a special guest on the line right now, Dondre Whitfield. Welcome, sir.
Good morning.
Brother, how you doing, man? What's going on, brother? What's going on, my sister? How y'all doing?
We're doing pretty
We're
good.
doing
pretty
well.
Black and
good.
highly favored, King. You got a new book out, Man versus Male is the title of the book. Let's talk about that. What's the difference between a man and a male?
So the book is called Male versus Man, and the difference between those two is extreme. Males look to be served while men look to be of service. So in other words, male is the gender that you were chosen to be, but man is the job that you choose to do. And unfortunately, we keep handing out the title of man to everyone who turns 18 or 21 or has pecs. And that has done a great deal of damage in our society, not understanding the difference between those two.
Right.
Is
You
there
talk about
really
the difference between physicality and vocabulary in male versus man. So let's talk about the difference between what a male does and what a man does when it comes to those two things.
So males, because of the nature of them constantly looking to serve themselves, they look to master others in order to serve themselves. Men look to master themselves in order to serve others, right? Huge difference between those two. I never understood that because as a kid growing up, my father was in and out of jail my entire life. So the nature of the things that I did growing up in Brooklyn was, and my mother did a phenomenal job of creating a great human being. She taught me how to be compassionate. She taught me how to be kind. She taught me how to be conscious. But what she couldn't do was she couldn't teach me how to be something she was not. So the street began to teach me what they thought manhood was and what we've all thought manhood was for a long time, which really is about masculinity and sexuality. So in other words, if I can bench press 300 pounds, that probably makes me a man. If I've got 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 women, that probably makes me a man. But again, that speaks to my masculinity and my sexuality and not my manhood.
Now tell about the story about your father, because I
I
know there was one story where I heard you said you was riding in the car with your dad. And you explain the story a little bit, because I think that that tells a lot when we were growing up and how we not to raise our kids.
Totally. It was really profound. My father was a street hustler. And, my father could have been a great man had he had great instruction. But he had the kind of instruction that we all get from the street.
Right.
And so I'll never forget this. At the age, I think I was about 12, 13 years old. My father had a Lincoln Mark V. I'm really dating myself, but anyway.
Gotcha.
So at that time, that was the ride. So here we are. We're in this car. I've never gotten to spend much time with my father. And my father turns to me. We're at a light. He turns to me and he said, "Son, I love your mother. I would do anything for her." And I'll never forget how that made me feel, because every child just wants to hear that their parents love each other.
Right.
So I'm beaming, and in the next second, my father looks out the driver's side window, and he catcalls out to a woman across the street. While he didn't tell me this, the messaging that I got from that was profound, because what it said to me was, you can love one woman and lust after many. So that exchange set my trajectory as a cheater, because I wanted to be like my father, right? Like as every son does, until he begins to figure out that what his father is not what he should aspire to be. Right. That particular moment at 12 years old was profound, because it set my trajectory in relationships as a cheater.
Hey, Dondre, I had a similar experience, but mine was more direct. I actually confronted my father about his cheating on my mother, and he actually looked at me and said, "Oh, you only got one girlfriend?" And so from that point on, it made me feel like having one girlfriend was wrong.
Absolutely. It is, again, you begin to aspire to do the things that you think and I call this out in my book, there's a huge difference between being a grown male and being a man. Grown male just means that your body grew up, right? Now you're wearing the uniform of a man. The uniform is I got facial hair, I might have pecs, right? I might be wearing the accoutrements of accomplishment, right? But it absolutely has nothing to do with who I am supposed to be as a man in the capacity of serving the women and children in my life. And when we're giving those, forgive me for using this term because sometimes I feel like it's overused, but those toxic messages that we get toxic masculinity, right? Because we're given those toxic pieces of messaging that says that that's what manhood is, when absolutely it isn't.
Right. I think you're using the right term, though, because
and male versus man, you also talk about how, and just to go along with that, you talk about how a lot of times women feel like they have to be, quote, ride or die for their guy, and I have to wait this 10 years until he finally decides he's going to do the right thing and settle down. And if not, it's like, well, why didn't you hold your man down? And you shouldn't have to be, like you said in the book, a man's mother or a male's mother.
A male's mother, absolutely that. And unfortunately, look, here's how damaging a lack of manhood is to our community, right? To our children. I have an 11-year-old son. I call him my kid, king in development, right? Every single day, there's another powerful piece of messaging that I give my son about how to matriculate into manhood. Right. So me being the model that I know that my son is going to mirror is extremely important for him. But here's usually the question. Why is your relationship with your daughter so important? Look, my wife's responsibility is to teach my daughter how to be a queen, how to teach my daughter how to be a woman. I can't teach her how to do that. I can't teach her how to be something she is not. But here's what I do teach my daughter. I am the walking, talking dress rehearsal for what my daughter is going to be able to see in what a man is and how to dress rehearse being in a relationship with a man. Right. There's a different talk between sisters and sisters. There's a different talk between sisters and brothers, right? I talk to, like, Envy. I might have a conversation with you that may be completely different than the conversation that I have with my wife, because we're two warriors, we're two hunters. We can understand specific language and lingo. If I give that same language and lingo to my wife, we're going to get divorced.
Let me tell you something, Dondre. Like, I like everything that you're saying. I think what you're describing is the divine masculine. I think the toxic masculinity is the term because that's what a lot of us, have learned. But I think what you're describing is the divine masculine, the sacred masculine. But is there really such a thing as being a man? Like, what does that mean outside of the social construct of gender?
So, again, and I say this often, male is just the gender that I was chosen to be. So when I was born, that was chosen for me. Man is the job that I choose to do, right? So man is sort of like a brand. Right now, if man were a brand, nobody would buy us. And here's why. Because males have damaged our brand. So let me illustrate this for you. When a guy abuses a woman, somebody will say, man, I can't believe that man did that. If a male molests a child, I can't believe that man did that. Well, I've been with my wife for 23 years. We've been married for 18 of those. I raised my helped to raise my daughter, my son. I do things outside in my community in order to elevate it. And people go, that's a good man. Here's the problem. We just described 3 brothers. 3 of those they're very different from one another. 2 are extremely toxic, and yet we still gave them the title of man. Then here's another brother who builds a sister queen in a relationship for 23 years, builds a young queen of 15 years old, builds a young king of 11 years old, and helps to elevate his community, and yet he has the exact same title. There's no wonder why there's extreme confusion going on in our community. There's no wonder why our community has fallen out with men. Why women have said, listen, brothers, we got it. We're good. You guys go ahead. We looked to you for leadership before, and we've gotten extremely damaged from it. we're good. We got it from here. There's a huge fallout. And if you don't believe that, look at the films that are out right now. Look at the television shows that are out. We're all painted with the same broad stroke. Every father has to be managed like a child on these television shows. I've done television shows throughout my 35-year career, and every single one of them, even the good ones, paint brothers in the same broad stroke, that we have to be managed like a child, and that women have it all together, when the truth of the matter is that we need each other in order to build balanced human beings, balanced children that go out to build a balanced society. And that's the reason why we're in an imbalanced society.
But you talk about that, and obviously you were in Queen Sugar, you played Remy. So how does that affect the roles that you choose? Because clearly, as you're doing a book like Male versus Man and you're trying to educate people, then what does that do for you when you're picking these roles?
You know, that's such a great question, because there's so much conflict. Once you know what you know, it's extremely difficult to ignore it. It's virtually impossible. When I came to this space, I've told people that acting is my passion, but activation is my purpose. So in other words, when God created me, he didn't just create me to be an actor. He created me for a very specific reason, and that reason was to impact humanity. Now, yes, some people will say, they will easily argue, the roles that you play on television or in film or on stage impact humanity. But the greater impact is me helping another human being to find their purpose. Many people walk through life miserable as heck, despite the fact that they're highly accomplished, they've got a lot of money, and yet they're extremely unhappy. I created a digital series called Male versus Man. My first guest was Will Smith. Will and I had a powerful conversation where Will talks about how he had 8 #1 movies. They all grossed over $100 million. No other actor would ever have another run like that. And he said, my entire house was scorched earth. Nobody was happy. I was disconnected from my wife. I was disconnected from my children. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that no matter what, the money that lines your pockets is not going to line your purpose. The accomplishments that you gain. I counsel a brother who's won 8 Grammys. He's going to be actually one of the guests in the digital series too. Been counseling him for 2 years. Drug addiction, alcohol addiction, infidelity in his marriage. Been counseling him for over 2 years. And what he didn't get was dealing with the pain of his childhood and understanding what his purpose was as a man. So in choosing these roles, I'm sitting there and I'm going, wow. Even on Queen Sugar, right? Remy is this great character who's supposed to be this great man, this family man, this community man. He's a water irrigation specialist, a professor at LSU, and yet we're still looking at the fact that he smokes weed. He's cheating on, he's about to cheat on his girlfriend and cheat on her with her sister, and all of these things. That's not what men do. But I completely understand why that's a blind spot, because we've got specific people writing stories that don't know how to tell the stories of men because they don't know the difference between males and men. So my struggle every day is trying to figure out, how do I choose these roles? Because again, to that point, the role that I play is going to impact the messaging behind what people think a man is.
Why not write them? Why not write your roles?
Thank you for that. Done. So I am now in the midst of shopping. So as you may or may not know, first job I ever did on television, I was 15 years old, playing Vanessa's boyfriend, Robert, on
Yes.
The Cosby Show. I can't even explain to you how incredible that was. And that's such a great segue, because I'm going to talk about Bill Cosby in a second. That time in my life was so profound because I was still living in Brooklyn. Shout out to my home, Bushwick. And literally being on the most watched show in television history at that time and still living in the hood was really profound. And what I watched in doing that show was this great movement of a family. You see this great man and this great woman partnered in creating these great children and great community. And I always said, when the time came in my life, I was going to do that. I was going to be that. And now we've arrived at that place. Me being partnered with the same woman for 23 years, being the husband that I am, being the father that I am. We are missing a Cosby Show in our midst. No disrespect to any show that's on television right now. And I'm not going to call out any specific names. You all can do that. My job is not to shame anything or anyone that's on television right now, but you can't name me one television show that we have on the screen that honors who a man is and what he's supposed to be in his fathering and in his husbandhood. Again, to the point that I made earlier, every single man that you see on television has to be managed like one of the children. In fact, the children that are on the show help to manage their father. It's extremely disappointing. And so what I've done was, based on our lives, I've created a show that gets back to what we used to see, which is men that actually contribute to their household in a very profound way, help to build their children in order to build a more balanced society by putting them out because they've become great citizens under his and her roof. So that's the show that I've created.
I think Blackish does that. And, I get what you're saying, but I don't think it's anything wrong.
You're going to make me go there, huh?
No, I think Blackish does that. And as a father of three, I think one thing you realize being a father, being a daddy is not a dictatorship. Sometimes our kids do manage us because we learn so much from them. You know what I mean?
But here's my point, and I completely get what you're saying, Charlamagne. Here's my problem with that. And this is no disrespect to my brother Kenya, who created the show. No disrespect to my brother Anthony Anderson, who does a fantastic job of playing that role. But the kinds of shaming that happens from that father to that son, whether it's being his complexion, whether it's being his gender neutral self in the way that his son dresses, there have been such a number of different ways that this particular father has created a space of damage in that environment, and particularly to his son. If I did that to my son would be extremely confused about what he's supposed to be as a man. So in other words, we've got folks that are writing some of these shows that are confused about what manhood is themselves. So watch this. I was estranged from my father for 20 years. At 26 years old, I was doing All My Children at the time. Went back to Brooklyn. I found my father, get him in the car with me, and Big Me was finally going to stand up for little broken me. And I told my father, if I ever saw him again, nothing good would happen. I said it a different way, but I don't speak that way now. But you can sort of fill in the blanks. And it was going to center around somebody dying, and it wasn't going to be me. 20 years had passed. My daughter came and sat next to me on the couch, and she said, "Dad, do you know where your father is?" The truth is that I knew exactly where my father was. But I knew that the answer that I was going to give her was not going to be good enough. And I finally realized that all the things that I was teaching my children, how to be kind, how to be conscious, how to give people grace, those were not the things that I was teaching them in this particular instance. And then if I didn't clean up what was going on between me and my father, that I would be cementing that into my children. What I finally realized about my father was my father couldn't father me because he himself was unfathered. Absolutely. My father could have become a great man had he had great instruction.
Absolutely.
And it's one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because I said, if there were a playbook, I wanted to write the playbook for manhood that I could have given my father, not as a 70-year-old man, but as the 7-year-old boy that never got what he needed in order to become the man that he was destined to become when he was created. So when I wrote this book with my father in mind, giving him a playbook for his manhood, and for my sisters, because every time I speak to a sister who is single and who doesn't have a manhood messaging partner, they all say the same thing. How do I teach my son? How do I help my son matriculate into his manhood? My mother was single after she became pregnant because my father left. So my mother struggled to teach me. She couldn't teach me, again, how to be something she was not. So this messaging, this book, is extremely important to me because I feel like I'm resuscitating the circles that I ran in for my entire life. And now I'm helping to restore some of the circles that I can't get my hands on because this book is far-reaching.
Now, let me ask you a question. That leniency that you give your dad, right? That forgiveness that you give your dad. Now, you think about it. We talk about upbringing. And if there's no father figure in a young man's life, who raises the child? Who raises the kid, right? If the mom is working, she's working 2 jobs to provide, to pay for school, to pay for food. So usually 9 times out of 10, if it's not a grandparent or a family member, the streets raise that kid. So that leniency that you give your dad and forgiveness, do you think the court system should do the same? Because these children are not being raised by a father figure. They don't ask to be in this world, but they are here. And now they have to figure it out as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, a high school student. And these streets raise them. And a lot of times they go into places where they're not supposed to, but it's not because they necessarily want to. It's because of bad guidance.
Mm-hmm. You know, to that point, the court system should. We know that the court system won't. So in my book, I talk about how this is why it's so important for our young kings to get manhood messaging, because if we don't father them, the system fathers them. And the way the system fathers them is they lock them up. So this is why the messaging of manhood is so extremely important for our young males to get from us, because the system is going to father them in one way. They're going to put them on a timeout. It's going to be extensive. It's going to be harsh. And here's the damage that further happens. Now, look at the gang violence that we have throughout the country, right? New York, to Chicago, Detroit, LA, anywhere that you look in this country where there is gang violence, you're going to experience one thing. You're going to experience males who are looking for the love of men.
Right.
You're not looking at monsters. You're looking at males who don't have manhood messaging, and they're looking for the love of men. Every gangster that I've ever spoken to in my entire life, and let me tell you something, I'm really about this work. I go and I speak to my brothers who are gang affiliated, and they all tell me the exact same thing. They said, Dondre, it's like, yo, man, I love my mother. I respect my mother. My mother did everything for me, right? They always talk about how much they would do for their mother, but they never talk about how they would not gangbang. So what does that tell us? It tells us that a woman is not the secret sauce to matriculating a male into manhood. And what is missing from the secret recipe is us as the ingredient. But us as the ingredient, we have to understand what manhood is in the first place in order to gift our sons that messaging. Those brothers that are out on the street right now have never had someone, and I often say this, if we overexpose our boys to feminine accommodation, and I'm going to explain that in a second, and they lack manhood accountability, you're going to get those forms of toxic masculinity. My wife is from the south side of Chicago. Let me tell you something. My wife ain't no punk. My wife is not a shrinking violet. But when it comes to my 11-year-old son, I'm sitting here And I'm just shaking my head in like amazement because she just turns into this like, I don't even know how to describe it.
He gets away with everything?
Oh my gosh. She is incapable at times of following up in a way that is necessary for this dude to get it. And I have to come in and I have to say, hey, you, come here. Come here. Didn't we discuss this yesterday? Didn't we discuss this an hour ago? I want you to do that. I want you to do that, and I want you to do that right now. And here's what I want you to also do. I want you to go to your mother right now, and I want you to apologize for what you just did. That's manhood accountability. My wife is accommodating him at every turn. That's her little boyfriend, right? That's her son. She's raising our daughter, but she's loving our son.
Nah, I gotta push back on that, Dondre, and I'm gonna tell you why. You know, when you talk about sacred masculine and the divine feminine, I think in order for any human being to reach their sacred purpose, you have to have a healthy balance of both. What you just described was the masculine quality of firmness, right? But what you're describing in your wife is the feminine quality of nurturing. A human needs both in order to be a whole human.
Yes, indeed. I absolutely agree with you. But you mentioned a great word, balance. So the imbalance comes in when we over nurture, right? So think of it this way. My wife breastfed our children for a couple of years. Now, what do you think would happen? There's a reason why, aside from social norms, that a mother stops breastfeeding her child. And that is to get her child to understand that they now need to learn how to feed themselves. Over nurturing is I keep feeding you to the degree that I take away your ability to learn how to feed yourself. I say this also in the book. When you enable a boy, you disable the man. So when you take away his opportunities to be able to grow, in order for him to move in a space of discomfort. Remember, think of life like a gym. If I was sitting here and I was doing reps and my arms began to fatigue and I stopped doing the reps, what did I prevent myself from doing? I prevented myself from growing, because the growth is me pushing through that space of discomfort, right? I got to keep my muscles in a perpetual state of discomfort in order for their growth. Now, to your point, the balance comes in when I allow my muscles to rest, right? But I can't allow them to rest in the moment of growth and not push through in order for me to get elevated, right? I can rest after I've had my workout, but I first have to allow myself to push through that level of discomfort in order for me to get to that level of elevation that I'm seeking.
Then you have the balance between parent and friend. You see, because when I was being raised, my dad wasn't my friend, and he told me clearly, I'm your father. I'm not your friend. But what it made me do is when I graduated out of college, I wanted to leave because I had no place in that house, I felt. Now, with my kids, it's more, I'm your parent, but I'm also your friend. You can talk to me about everything, but that goes to the part when I see Blackish. You know, my son could watch me and Charlamagne do something stupid and be like, Dad, you guys look sus. But it's a joke, and I can go back and say the same, where he doesn't feel like he can't come to me and talk to me about something. So it's that line between being a parent and being his friend or her friend.
Absolutely. When and here's what's interesting. We're saying the same things, but to my son, I say them a little differently. I often tell my son, because he will begin to use language that he uses with his friends, even to his mother. And I say, hey, listen, hey, I'm not one of your friends. I'm your father, right? But the language that he and I have is loving language.
Right.
So I talk about this in the book too. It's the kind of language that you give to your son that you feel is the kind of language that you would give to a friend, because it is loving language, right? In the book, I talk about two types of language, protein and kerosene. Protein is the kind of language that we give in order to build people up. Kerosene is the kind of language that we use in order to burn people down.
Yep.
So every single day, I'm constantly asking myself, and I love this, you're going to love this, Indy, you got to do this. And I need you to promise me that you're going to do this experiment. I use my children as my accountability partners. Every month, I have a conversation with both my 15-year-old daughter, my 11-year-old son. I've been doing it now for a couple of years. I come to them, I sit them down together, and I say, is there anything that I can do to be a better father to you? Man. When I tell you, brother, you're going to love this.
I do that. I learned that from my therapist.
Oh, bro, it's going to be the best elevation in terms of what your manhood is. And I'm so glad to hear that, because your children are going to give it to you in an unfiltered way. They haven't yet worked the muscle of being able to consistently lie. So they're going to give it to you in the way that you need to hear it for you to elevate yourself. Every single day that I sit down, I have a conversation with my son that I know is going to elevate him in the space of his manhood as he begins to grow in age. And those conversations are so beautiful. I find myself crying, and I always said this when I was a kid. I never understood watching white people on television. You know, when you see those moments where you see white people crying and they're happy? Mm-hmm. I never understood.
Tears of joy.
Yeah, I was like, what right person in their mind would cry when they're happy? And now I completely understand, because the fullness of what being a human being really is, the contribution of the messaging that I have in order to grow my children, in order to elevate them, in order to use them as my accountability partners, in order for me to look deeper into myself, is beautiful, because it was never done with me. It was never done to me. And I know what kind of effect that would have had on me had I had that kind of relationship with my father, or even my stepfather. My stepfather did a phenomenal job of stepping in to care for someone else's son, but we never really had that connection between a father and son, where we had those kinds of exchanges. And I don't fault him either, because again, we're just going off of the information that we got.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted to say. Like, one thing, you realize, and this came to me in therapy a while ago, was like your father, or even your parents in general, they're just doing the best that they could. And we sometimes don't realize that we are the first generation that has the luxury of healing. Our parents and our grandparents were trying to survive. So I think that, we got to be patient when it comes to our parents.
Absolutely that. I even speak to this in the book as well. Maya Angelou said, may she rest in peace, she said, and I'm paraphrasing, we do better when we know better. Mm-hmm. But sister was talking about a time where we didn't know better. We didn't have the kind of information readily available to us like we do now. Right now, if we wanted to, we could pop on our laptop, punch in a search, and get some great information. And if we wanted to elevate ourselves, we could apply that information for the sake of our elevation. Generations before us didn't have that at their disposal. They didn't have those kinds of books at their disposal. They didn't have the doctors on television that we see, the healers on television that we see, the podcasts that we have, the laptops that I mentioned. We didn't have all of that information readily available for us for the sake of our mind, spirit, and soul elevation. We didn't have that. Mm-hmm. Now we do. So in the book, I say, with all due respect to our fallen sister, we do better when we choose better. Because now we have an abundance of information. Now it's going to be about choosing the kind of information that we apply to our lives in order to elevate ourselves, so that we can facilitate the elevation of our children.
Listen, when did you get to a place of healing? Because I know people will hear you and they'll be like, oh, he talking all this holier than thou stuff. When did you get to your place in healing? Because you didn't just arrive there. Nobody just arrives to a place of healed.
Absolutely. I'm going to tell you, when to use a football analogy, I got tired of fumbling the ball. Mm-hmm. I got tired of turning the ball over. I got tired of cheating in relationships. And contrary to popular opinion, to my sisters, I want to tell you this, brother to sister. If a brother cheats on you, the narrative is that males don't care. They do. There's Absolutely. A reason why. I'm working on a book right now that loosely titled "The Hero and the Herd." It is my opinion, and I'm always willing to be wrong. It is my opinion that every man needs to feel like the hero of his house, and every woman needs to feel heard. When a man doesn't feel like the hero of his house, bad things usually begin to happen. When a woman doesn't feel like she's heard in her house, bad things begin to happen. In that space, in my counselings, I use that in order to build the bridge that is necessary to get to that space. I never had that messaging. And so when a male is in a space where he cheats, he's devastated because he's let someone down and he knows in his spirit this is not the life that he was intended to lead. Now, he's been taught how to ignore that. He's been taught how to do something contrary to that. But the truth of the matter is that he's just going off of the information that he was given. But in his spirit, he is devastated because we are created by the same creator. And that creator intended us to be builders. He intended us for us to build life and not tear life down. He intended for us to be protein and not kerosene. I got tired of being the kerosene of my own life, the kerosene of my community. I said, there's got to be a better way. And when I started doing that, I began 2 books that basically became the best 2 books in my life, the Bible and the dictionary. Because the Bible, and I'm not selling religion here. So before anybody goes crazy right now, I am not selling you religion. Look, church is the introduction to religion. Bible is the introduction to instruction. My favorite books within that book is the book of Proverbs, because even if you don't believe anything else that you read, if you read the book of Proverbs, there is great instruction in that book. It's going to help you build a great life for yourself. It's going to help you come to another state of consciousness. When I began studying, and I actually began studying with a band of brothers, this is the first time in my life where I ever felt love from a pack of brothers. I will never forget coming home one day after studying with these brothers, and I cried because I never felt loved by men like that, and didn't have it shamed for being something feminine. Mm-hmm. It was such a profound time in my life. And when I started to get that information, I started to get that messaging, it started to feel good. And I started to adjust. I was in my 30s, man.
Okay.
That's why.
Same here.
Yeah. That's why it was it's so interesting to me when we talk about passing on that title of man too soon. Oh, he's 18 now. He's a man. Oh, he's 21 now. He's a man. Car companies think the magic age is 25. We're not going to rent you a car till you're 25. That's when we know you're a man then. No. Manhood comes when you get instruction, when you get information, and you begin to apply it to your life, when you begin to apply it to your trajectory, when you begin to allow that stuff to help you build and elevate those around you. That's when you become a man. Beyond that, you're simply a male trying to matriculate into that space. And for me, I just got tired of being the kerosene. I wanted to become the protein, not just for me, for my wife, for my children, for my people, my community. That's when the magic moment started happening for me.
Right. Dondre, I just want to ask you one quick question too.
Yeah.
Since you referenced cheating, can you be a man and cheat?
Absolutely. You can be a man and have moments of maleness. So remember, when you've practiced the art of being male, which is serving yourself, that has ingrained itself in you. And now it takes a second for you to really flush that out of your system. So I liken it to this, and I talk about this in the book too. I consider myself a recovering addict of being male. I'm addicted to maleness. I'm addicted to serving myself. That's what the environment around me should look. Every drug dealer I ever saw in my life that had, all the kicks, had the cars, he had the women. As a young male, as a hunter, that really was attractive to me. And so I aspired to be that. Mm-hmm. So I practiced learning how to be an elevated male, right? My shoe game was good. Car game became good. My girl game became good, right? That was a practice. Well, I became addicted to that behavior. And now in becoming a man, I realized that that's contrary to everything that I want to be, everything that I need to be. But I realized that I am an addict. So let me give you an example. In the book, I talk about as a married man. For me, now, some people can make this work for them. That's completely up to them. I'm just telling you what works and what doesn't work for me. As a married man, I don't have any single friends because my single brothers want to do single stuff. And that, for me, is in complete contrast to everything that I'm trying to accomplish in my life as a married man. All of my friends are either married or in committed relationships and or have children. All of them. Why? Because I'm trying to accomplish the same exact thing here. Now, some people have asked, well, what if one of your friends gets divorced and he's single? Well, that's different, obviously, right? But if that brother is not committed to a life of building a committed relationship in his life, of helping to elevate those around him, we're going to have a tough time. Because if he's in a space of perpetual maleness, where he's looking to serve himself, and I'm in a state of perpetual manhood, looking to serve the women and children in my life, that's conflict. And for me, that can't happen. So to answer your question, yes, you can absolutely be a man and have moments or bouts of maleness, but you have to remember that you got to keep restoring yourself to get back to your space of manhood.
The great thing about this conversation is, I think, we're all saying the same thing. We're just using different language. Because when you talk about, cheating, I always say that, men cheat for ego. And it's usually when our ego is wounded, right? But when you want to be the hero of your house, it's when you have a healthy ego. Because there's nothing wrong with ego. It's just about whether you have a wounded ego or a healthy ego. When you got a wounded ego, that's when you're out here sleeping with a bunch of different women, trying to make yourself feel good. When you got a healthy ego, is when you're actually doing right by your wife, doing right by your kids. And that's what really makes you feel like the hero of the house.
Well, that's why I love the quarantine, too. And see, the quarantine is, nothing matters. All that stuff you named before, the cars don't matter. The sneakers don't matter. None of that matters during this quarantine. You realize that all that stuff on the outside world means shit. And the most important thing is your family. That's the best thing about this quarantine for me is, I thought I was close with my family. I'm even closer now. That's the best thing about this. You realize all that other shit means nothing.
Absolutely nothing. And to your point, so I'm gonna touch on what both of you brothers said, because you both said things that are extremely powerful. Charlamagne, you touched on the fact that ego, and dealing with the ego of the flesh, right? The ego of the flesh is feed me, and it's feeding me the things that are going to serve me. right? When those things don't serve me, then I'm looking to supplement them with something else. That's what the women are about. That's what the kicks are about. That's what the cars are about. That's me feeding my flesh. The ego of the spirit is I want to be the best man I can possibly be. And if I'm in a healthy competition, like I'll give you an example. The band of brothers that I have in my life that are my counsel, COUNCIL, and I look to them to give me counsel, COUNSEL, they are the examples that I have of manhood in my life that I am in a healthy competition with. I'm going, wow, look at my brother right there, man, doing it with his kids like that. Wow, man, I got to do better. I got to elevate myself. I got to get there. Right? We all looked at The Last Dance, right? Mm-hmm. And it was such a powerful documentary for us to watch, right? And we saw what a competitor Michael Jordan was. Well, watch this. As men, if we became competitors in the competition of manhood in a healthy way, not like, oh, yo, envy, I'm killing you right now, right? Because now that's unhealthy. That's kerosene. But the protein in that is for me to go, wow, I'm looking at envy and I'm watching how he's doing it. I'm like, wow, my brother is using this time right now in quarantine to help build himself, to help build his family, to have him get to allow himself to get closer to his family. Yo, I got to do that. I got to get to envy level, right? And then what I want to do is I want to surpass that. So if we got Last Dance competitiveness about our manhood, what we do is we elevate ourselves and subsequently we elevate our families at the same time. My band of brothers, I am in competition with them every single day. In my head, I'm going, I got to be a better husband like my brother Hassani. Yeah, I got to be a better father like my brother Aaron. All of those things, I got to be a better spiritual leader like my brother Matt. Like all of these things I'm using to elevate myself because I'm still a man. I'm still a hunter. I now have to find healthy ways of directing my hunter, my warrior spirit, as opposed to feeding them, which will bring about that toxic masculinity that we refer to every single day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you talk about manhood, we got to get out of here, Dondre. But when you talk about manhood, it's got to be sacred masculinity. Sacred masculinity, divine feminine. That's how you have a healthy, healed, balanced life. To me, that's my personal take on it.
And Dondre, we will definitely pick this back up at another time because I feel like that was amazing and inspirational. And I love that you are really about the work. You've definitely been helpful to me personally. So I do want to say that I appreciate you for even behind the scenes things that you've done for me. And I do want to leave us with a quote from the book. And it says, I believe that a man who is truly successful is one with healthy and whole relationships. Thus, the women in a successful man's life usually feel honored, covered, protected, and heard. My goal every day is to make my mom, my wife, my daughter, and all the other sisters in my path, related or not, feel that way as well. And I really feel that. So I know this book is about malehood, man versus manhood, but it is something that was beneficial for me to be able to read also. And everybody should check out your series too. I saw Will Smith was on there, Boris Kodjoe, and I know you have more coming.
Oh yeah, I've got a whole bunch, but I need to speak to what you just said because it's so powerful, and it really, I'm finding getting emotional because from time to time, I'll check in with you and just, hey, how you doing, and just go out with big bro, whatever you need from me, I'm always there. This book is not just for males or men; it's for our sisters too. Because many of our sisters have gone unfathered. And so this book fills in some of the blanks that have been left by being unfathered. It also allows them to be taught the difference of what a male and a man is so that they can understand what they're supposed to be looking for in being appropriately partnered. Many of our sisters choose the brothers in their life because of the things that we mentioned, recently, or wow, he's got a great job, or he's got great pecs, or look at that beard, or he's cute, and all of those things. And none of those things speak to his manhood at all. in getting into this book, it will teach our sisters exactly what a man is and how it serves them. And it speaks to them being restored and resuscitated out of missing what they didn't get from their fathers. So that's the whole space that we need to get to in order for us to, get to the place in life that's going to be rich. And I'm not talking about money.
Right.
All right, brother.
Thank you, Dondre.
Thank you for checking in. We appreciate it.
Thank you, King.
My sister, I appreciate y'all. Man, thank you so much for having this conversation. I look forward to part 2.
All right. It's Dondre Whitfield. It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.